Danielle Cook is a professional nutritionist and cooking instructor, and her sister, Adrienne Cook, is a gardening and cooking writer. We're excited to have them with us today for today's Farmers Market Treasures live cooking demonstration.
Hi, everyone. I'm Danielle Cook,
And I'm Adrienne Cook.
and we are the Cook Sisters. For those of you who are new to the program, welcome. For those of you who've been with us or seen us before, welcome back. We're excited to be here once again to share a couple of great recipes that are going to be using ingredients from the fall markets that are, so abundant right now. So today we have a couple of recipes. I'm actually going to get launched in just a minute on mine. And the first one that we're going to do is the roasted squash, hard squash, the winter squash, with a wonderful dressing and a nice little garnish on top. And it's going to combine winter squash with lentils. But before we do that, did you want to add anything about in terms of the whole farmers thing and gardens?
Right, exactly. I mean, this is the perfect time to be at the farmer's market because you still got some summer stuff still there. You're going to be able to find zucchinis and summer squash and tomatoes. Danielle's plants are still cranking out for tomatoes.
Mm-hmm.
And mine not so much. And you'll see, and of course, the whole range of the fall things. Savoy cabbage, which is what we're going to be using today. You'll see lots of different cabbages. We'll talk about that in a minute. And then the different squashes that Danielle's going to be using and talking about, and even onions.
Yeah, we'll get to that. Let's
in just a minute. All right.
You want to take a look?
Pears.
Yep.
The pears at the farmers market are the best, in my opinion.
Yes.
I'm sure you can find good pears in your supermarket, but these are wonderful.
So
Okay.
let me switch cameras so you can get a closer look at what we're going to be doing today, and a closer look of our counter bounty, for lack of a better term. So we do have lots of great things, as we were just mentioned. These are all tomatoes that are still coming off my vines, and pears and apples that I got from the farmer's market. Celery, which I did not get from the farmers.
But they have it. I've seen them.
Sure. And now I want to, these lovely tiny little, they might look somewhat like shallots, but they're actually red Chipino onions, which are fabulously sweet. You peel them, you roast them, or as I was talking about just a minute ago, I said to Adrienne, I think I may just pickle these, peel them and slice them and pickle them in a little balsamic vinegar and use them as a condiment to a stew in the next week or so. So we are not actually going to be touching on those today, but this just gives you an array of a sense for what's happening in the markets, in the farmers markets this time of year. My focus today is going to be on these lovely winter squash. And we've got a number of varieties. This is a honey nut, which is a combination of a couple of, what we call a hybrid. So it's been cross pollinated or cross whatever.
Yeah, it's hybridized. Yes.
Hybridized.
Yes.
And I'm going to actually use that in our dish today. And then, of course, there's acorn butternut, which you're familiar with. And then these guys, spaghetti squash, this long oval one. And then these two are actually curry, and that is curry as in K-U-R-I, not curry as in the dish, C-U-R-R-Y. These are called curry, and they come in red and green, and they're great.
They're one of the best tasting winter squashes I think that we have.
Absolutely, absolutely. But for our purposes today, we're going to work with this cute little guy, and I'm going to start by cutting the ends off and peeling. And this is always something that is, a good question for people on peeling. And the skins on many of these, like the curry, I roast it just with the skin on, but it is completely optional with regard to the curries. And each of these varieties has its pros and cons on whether peeling or not peeling. So the key to peeling a squash, and this applies especially to these butternuts because they tend to be very thick skinned, is a good peeler. Now there's a variety. I've got a couple of options here, but we get this question a lot in terms of the utensils and things we like to use in the kitchen. This is a serrated version of a peeler, which can be really, really helpful for things like actually tomatoes when the skins are, when you're really trying to grab, or a mango, for instance, when you're really trying to grab the skin that tends to be somewhat fibrous. I'm going to use this, which is a brand new, just hand peeler, and go ahead and use that. And this is how I do all of my thicker skin squash, even if I'm doing a dish with like a pie pumpkin, and I'm not going to just roast the pumpkin and scoop the flesh, but I need chunks and I need to get rid of the outer skin. This thing works really well.
I think they call it a Y peeler, don't they?
A Y peeler?
Yeah, because it looks like a Y.
Y. Okay. This becomes the changing direction when you're around the bulb or the rounded part of a butternut, or in this case, honey nut. Changing the direction of the peeling makes things a little bit easier.
This is a wonderful peeler to use if you're trying to do very thin strips of something and you don't have a mandolin or a good knife. That you can get really great strips of carrot or even butternut squash.
That's an excellent point. What a multi-purpose use for one peeler.
Yes.
And so what I'm going to do here is, you can see the color difference. I'm actually going to give this a peel. I want to get rid of some of the lighter, whiter part. And there's just like the butternut squash, you're going to get a little bit of ribbed green parts in there. And I'm just going to get rid of that part.
Because that's fibrous also.
Yes. And it just shows that it's a little too close to the skin, almost like the pith inside of a lemon or a lime or an orange that can be a little bit bitter. So we're just going to get rid of that and put this all in the dump. That's going to go out to my compost. And now we're going to slit it down the middle. And in the case of a butternut, and I'm just going to show you what my preferred method with the butternut is to actually start by, because this part is so rounded, I actually like to start by separating the two halves. And that makes the peeling so much easier when you have them separated. Okay, so we're back to this. Now we got to get rid of the inside of that. And for that, I'm just going to use a large spoon.
Don't you sometimes use a grapefruit spoon to do this?
Grapefruit spoons are great for this, but I no longer have any grapefruit spoons, and I keep forgetting to get more, to order more. Go ahead and just add this. So this is not a big deal. You can still just scrape away at this. And then we'll take a look compare the flesh color of these two different squash. Now they're going to cook at this pretty much the same rate, and that's going to be the case with all of these squash. They tend to be, moist enough that nothing's really more dry than the next one, so you can really get them cooking pretty much all at the same time. I'll roll it over flat side down so it doesn't, just a little bit safer with the cutting piece. And for this recipe, I'm going to cut these things into wedges.
Full of carotene, is that what you always say?
Carotenes, yeah. Carotenes are part of the family of flavonoids, and carotenes are what give these beautiful squash their deep, deep color. You can see the color difference, hopefully. I'll try to get it a little closer to.
There is a difference.
It is. This one is almost more.
Gold.
It's got a little bit more yellow in it.
Yep.
Than the other. Okay, I'm going to set this one aside for right now and just go ahead and give this a quick peel. Oops. Get those. I don't want to end up mixing up the peels and the nice squash. You're going to preheat your oven while you're doing this. Get your oven up to 425 degrees or 400 degrees. 425 is fine. And these are going to roast for about 20 minutes. There's one other component of this recipe as well that I'm going to switch to in just a second, and we'll talk about that, which are the lentils. Now, this dish makes really a complete meal. And one of the reasons I really like this dish is that you can actually deconstruct and you don't have to use all the different aspects to it. And by that, I mean, if you wanted to do this without the lentils, that would be absolutely fine. But the lentils adds more nutrition, more fiber, lots of good minerals and vitamins and proteins and comfort. Yeah. Winter comfort. True.
Winter comfort.
That's very, very true. Okay. So we're just about there. You want a total of, about 1.5 pounds of squash. It's also a recipe that can reheat really well. So here we go again, cutting our into wedges. And then from here, I'm going to line them all, these wedges, on a prepared cookie sheet, which is essentially my definition of preparing a cookie sheet. It says, go out and buy parchment paper and line your cookie sheet with parchment paper. That's the easiest means to me to getting a successful roast, and whether it is cookies or squash, we're going to just line these up and do some minimal dressing, so to speak, minimal seasoning on them, just some salt and pepper and oil. Some good olive oil. That's always a nice thing.
The roasting of the squashes really brings out the sweetness in them. And they get the sugars to rise and get caramelized. And
Absolutely.
so it really makes it deepens the flavors. It just makes it, anybody who, if you've ever roasted squash, you know what I'm talking about. It's just a great way to cook it.
It is. And, there is a little bit of elbow grease that goes into having to prepare this recipe because of the peeling. There are many recipes out there that work with squash where you just cut it in half and throw it in a hot oven and roast it out and then scoop out the flesh. But, this is a different, as you will see as we get through this is a very different end
It's
product.
no more difficult than doing roasted vegetables, though.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Would you mind grabbing that tray and setting it over here so I can access some olive oil? Okay, a little olive oil. Just a drizzle. And some salt, a little sprinkling of salt. This is a good sea salt. You don't need much. You really don't need much salt on this. Just enough to get the moisture to start drawing out. And then some pepper. And I'm using a nice coarse ground pepper. So this then goes into a hot oven. And it'll cook for about 25 to 30 minutes. And while that's going, we're going to switch our attention over to lentils, the lentils that go into this dish. So there's, as many of you probably know, there are a lot of different varieties of lentils. Two of my favorites that I keep on hand all the time, which look quite differently in this bowl, right, are these very, the French, the sort of gray green, le prix lentils, which are wonderful. They hold their shape really well once they're cooked. They're a little bit smaller than the traditional green lentils, but they hold up really, really well in soups and stews. And the other variety that I love are these little black lentils, otherwise known as beluga lentils. And they tend to take usually a little bit longer to cook, but either way, lentils cook up really, really quickly. And today, what I've done is to cook up some of the black lentils, because I'm using that because I think the color is so great. It looks very Halloweeny or Halloweenish.
Sure.
If that's a word.
Sure.
And my preferred method, which is in the recipe, but I use this method for so many different lentil dishes, and it's really quite foolproof. And that is to mix the lentils with cinnamon, a stick of cinnamon. Everything's looking very dark on my cutting board right now. And some garlic. And I cook the cinnamon, which actually does help also. It helps break down the gas component in the lentils. So it can help in the digestion, help to digest. This was started as a half a cup of lentils, and it is now well doubled in size. We're not going to need that cinnamon stick anymore. So I'm just going to drain out the water from them. And this I did in advance, obviously, because we can't leave everything to the last minute here, since otherwise you would be with us for the rest of the day. And I know you have other things to do. So these lentils are cooked and ready for the final assembly. So we'll set that aside. So as our squash cooks along and the lentils are done, we can now switch our attention to making the dressing. And the dressing is going to be a combination of some yummy fallish flavors. Specifically, I'm going to put into this some pomegranate molasses. Now, pomegranate molasses, if you haven't worked with it, it might be worth, picking up a bottle. The bottles are not that large, and you can use this stuff in multiple ways, not just in salad dressings, but it works great in marinades. It works great in beverages.
You can drizzle it on roasted vegetables. It's one of the things I do a lot, and it's a wonderful, wonderful way to
fantastic
liven up roasted vegetables. A little lemon juice and a little pomegranate.
Did you guys?
If you don't have pomegranate molasses, what could you use instead?
Yes, that's a really good question. I would substitute actually a little bit of balsamic vinegar. It's not quite the same, but it will get you sort of that sweet sour balance. And the syrup is thick. It's different than a balsamic, or if you had a balsamic glaze on hand, which are very common now. They're easy to make, but if you can buy these balsamic glazes anywhere, any of these main supermarkets now carries this, and that would be the way to go. That would be a really good substitute. We're going to add a tablespoon of honey.
It's because the pomegranate is actually quite sour. I love it that way, but I think the honey does bring on that, reflects that sweetness that the squash has.
Absolutely. And then another great fall flavoring is we're going to do some cumin, a little bit of cumin, ground cumin. Get this. So just a hint. You can if you're really into cumin, you can do more than a half a teaspoon, but that will give it a nice flavoring. And then because we're going to balance all these different components of flavoring, we're going to do a little hit of some cayenne pepper.
Here, you want one of these? You're good?
I think I'm good here. I'm
great.
almost at the end.
There you go.
Just a little bit. I know Adrienne would double that amount, but I'm not Adrienne.
I probably would.
And then the dressing, being the dressing, a little salt, a little nice pinch of pepper, and we'll whisk that and add some oil. So we'll need 1/4 cup of oil. And whisk that in. You can also, you can do this in a mini food processor or in a jar. It's, you can probably see as I'm whisking, it's quite thick. Let me put that down. And the combination of the pomegranate syrup and the honey, getting a really nice paste-like finish. Look at that, beautiful. Really beautiful. Okay. This will, if you don't need to use all of it, then just keep it in an airtight jar and stick it in the refrigerator. But once it hits the warm squash, which truthfully we have some already roasted up because we can't really wait until the middle of the afternoon when everything comes together. Okay, now here we go. We're ready to assemble. We've got the squash that is done. We've got our serving bowl, and would you mind grabbing that? So we've got some, and then I'm going to see if you can swap that tray with the other. Here we have our roasted squash. This is not the one I just popped in the oven. Obviously, this is a different one. And you can see here, I've used the curry, the green curry, as well as butternut squash. So slightly different combination. One thing I wanted to also draw your attention to, which I should have done probably a minute ago, is this is the green curry squash that I used for this. And you can see this on a lot of these winter squashes. You get sometimes this bubbling kind of hard stuff. This, on these types, this is a sugar buildup. This is how the sugar emits itself from the squash. There's actually a type of squash that you may have seen in your farmers markets that they call a popcorn squash. And they're so ugly, they're beautiful. They're just like covered in pockets of this. And it looks like, excuse me, not popcorn squash, peanut squash. They look like they have peanuts stuck to the outside of them. And that is all sugars that have come from the inside. And those squash, which are heirloom, they date back, we've been using those certainly in Europe many, many, many years. And they're incredibly sweet, sweeter than a pie squash. So if you come across one of those and you want to play around with it, I would highly recommend you take it home, cut it into chunks, roast it, and scoop the flesh out. It's very watery, very fibrous, and extremely sweet. Great for making soups. Last year, I did a whole bunch of pumpkin butter with those. So, they're not just for decorations. They actually are quite delicious to eat. So here we're going to go ahead and do our assembly of our final product. As I said, if you wanted to serve this just as a side dish and felt like having the lentils was going to be a little too much in the dish, you don't have to do it with the lentils. But we're always looking in our household, and the cook family is always looking for new innovative ways with vegetables and grains, and especially for those family members and friends who don't do any meat. This can actually be, and I hang on to that, this can actually become a wonderful vegan dish. Although I'm going to garnish it with a little bit of feta cheese. So I'm going to blow that one today. But in theory, you could certainly use it, do without any of the dairy topping, and then it becomes a great vegan dish. So we're going to drizzle some of this really thick. And let's see if I can make this work with a spatula. Just dress it. Yeah, there we go. Woo! Just kind of coat everything. And you see we're getting that real Halloween look to this with our black and orange. And I'm going to finish this off with some pumpkin seeds that I lightly toasted, a couple tablespoons of pumpkin seeds. Again, fabulous source of omega-3s, really good minerals, good fats. Actually, these are not as fatty as some of the other nuts, but just really great source of omega-3s. And then some chopped scallions, which actually these need to be broken up a little bit. There, I have 4 scallions here that I sliced up. You could use chives instead if you wanted. You could even use a little purple onion. That would be very pretty, because then you would get that whole, purple thing going, sticking with that whole fall Halloween color scheme. And then, because life is always better with a little cheese or butter, we're going to add some feta. No, this actually gives it a really great, that salty kind of briny flavoring to it. So about a 1/4 cup or more or less. And now I'm going to just, a little spatula, just to be able to drizzle a little bit more of this. And you could also put some fresh chopped parsley on here just to pop the coloring of the green. I'm going to do a little, there we go. Isn't that pretty?
Really syrupy.
Very syrupy. And I'll just leave the rest of that. I would serve that on the side so you don't overwhelm the whole dish with too much of the dressing. So with that, we have our beautiful first recipe of the day. And I'm going to flip us back on the camera so we can field any questions that you guys might have. And we will also it'll give us a second to start transitioning for Adrienne's recipe. So if there are any questions, please let us know and we'll be happy to answer them.
So just a real quick question for you. How do you know which winter squash you're going to peel or not peel? Like, when do you know you can eat the peel versus not eating the peel?
So theoretically, all the peels are edible, but obviously a lot of them are not necessarily pleasant to eat. Often this becomes a subjective thing because some people are not bothered by the peels. My rule of thumb really is that the butternut squash and the cousins to that, I always peel. And I was always of the mind understanding that any of these heavy duty winter squash should be peeled. But I've come to actually experiment and in my readings learned that many of them, if not most of them, are actually fine at a high heat roasted. The skins actually do soften. So, I mean, that's not a real direct answer because it's a subjective thing, right? And did you want to chime in?
Try the acorns unpeeled. I use them all the time unpeeled. In fact, do I see here that you got some peel on some of these?
Yes, this is the green curry.
This is the green curry. Yes,
Yeah.
Still has a peel on.
Yeah.
And so some of these that are where the flesh is particularly sweet and lovely. Oh, here we go. It's delicious.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's really good. So yeah, try it without. Whenever I give my husband slices of acorn squash with the peel on, he always eats the flesh and leaves the peel behind. But I'm willing to eat his peel, so there you go.
Yeah, I always used to think I had to peel acorn squash, which, with all these little lumps in there, what a pain. Turns out that was absolutely not necessary. When they're cooked right, when they're cooked enough, the skin is very soft and, you really don't need to. For whatever reason, butternut squash spaghetti squash is the other one that because of the way it grows, that's a whole different that's a whole different
The
thing.
spaghetti squash never softens. It just
It
has
never
a
softens.
shell. Yeah.
It's really a shell. And I find that as well with the butternuts and honestly with pie pumpkins. Although again, some people are not bothered by the skins of the pie pumpkins, but yeah. So
yeah,
I think you just have to try it. And you know what? The worst case scenario is if you've got these large wedges of a winter squash that you roasted and you don't like the skin, it's not that difficult to eat around the skin.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. We also have a question about molasses. Could you use regular molasses instead of the pomegranate molasses in this recipe?
It's sweeter.
Well, the pomegranate molasses has a very distinct floral pomegranate flavor to it. I would not go with a regular molasses. That's really a just completely different product.
You could use the regular molasses, but you probably want to leave out the honey.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
You think?
I think so.
I mean, you could try it. I wouldn't use 2 tablespoons of regular molasses, though. The pomegranate molasses is, you know, it's just if it's just got a fabulously floral flavor to it. It really just.
But you could make a nice dressing with regular molasses.
Okay.
Also.
All right.
That's my thought.
Awesome. Thanks. Well, why don't we toss it over to Adrienne for her recipe, and then we can get to some more of these questions later on.
Okay.
I'm going to start clearing out of the way here.
Hi, everybody. Again. So I'm using, we're doing today, I'm doing a recipe on cabbage. Some people are a little, don't necessarily not their favorite vegetable. We do have, there's quite a few cabbages out there, however, and I think that's something was worth considering. If you don't like a green cabbage because it's got a strong sulfur aroma, you could use a Napa cabbage with this, or a Savoy, which is what I'm using today. Now the Savoy is most similar to the regular green cabbage, but it has a more, the leaves are a little softer. So this cooks up more quickly than regular cabbage, which is one of its main advantages. But I also love to use these large leaves for stuffed cabbage. So when I get a cabbage like this, half of it goes into leaves. I use it for stuffed cabbage. And then the other half, or the other portion of it that's tighter and where you can't really get the big leaves off, winds up being used the way traditional cabbage is. And that's what we're going to do today. And I need to grab my knife right here. Excuse me. You're going to go over?
Yep.
Okay. Here we are. Okay. So these are the big leaves that, as I mentioned a minute ago. And we're going to take the bottom off so that I can get as many of those off. And we're going to save those. Stuffed cabbage is one of those things that, obviously you don't use the whole thing, but it has less of that as you're cooking it. I think it has less of that sulfur smell when you're cooking it. For some reason, it's more like the heart of it. Thank you. I'll put this over here. So we're just going to finish this one. We can probably use also in some capacity. And then I think I'm going to get one more off of here before I'm going to start cutting it. There we go. These are too valuable to cut up, in my opinion. And of course, to get more, if you want to actually get more whole leaves off, you can just put this whole thing in some boiling water, and the bottom of it will, this end of it will soften, and you can get more off. But since we're going to be using most of it for this dish and other chopped cabbage dishes, just cut it straight down, and really any side's fine. I'm going to sit this over on the side. This is probably the hardest part of this whole recipe, is cutting the cabbage. So we're going to take the bottom out, like so. Just get rid of that. And here, we'll put this in your compost.
Yep.
And then this will be cut up in smaller pieces, like little squares. Thank you. And I'm doing a version of this that's going to really function more as a side, but you could make this into a main course. And in order to, what I would recommend if you're going to do a main course is maybe to make the cabbage a little bit larger, and also the kielbasa. We'll talk about that in a second. Make that a little bit larger, but we're going to cut it up quite small today. So an inch and a half, maybe.
So all of these cabbages are in the brassica family, which is really one of the most nutrient dense of foods. It's not just the cabbage in brassica families. It's the Brussels sprouts, and it's the broccoli, and it's even spans over into all kinds of greens. I mean, it's really a very, very wonderful family to get to know. If you don't have it in your diet, I would encourage it. And Savoy is one of my favorites. It really is such a fluffy, sweet, quick cooking cabbage. It's just, I think cabbage gets a bad rap.
Isn't that scent of it that you sometimes often get, isn't that part of the nutrient value that you're smelling, actually?
Well, it's the sulfur that is emitted from it. Yeah. Right. And that's a good thing.
Yeah.
It's really a good thing.
So we're going to I'm just going to do a smaller version of this. I think this will be enough to get started. And we're going to set that aside for just a second because I'm going to grab my kielbasa over here. And I want to pour in some safflower oil just to get the heat going. The kielbasa, if you don't have kielbasa, you can absolutely use other types of smoked meat, like you could use a smoked sausage like an andouille or something like that. But if you don't have any of those things, bacon works well, or just leave it out altogether. And you might want to just add maybe a teaspoon or 2 teaspoons of smoked paprika to add the flavor, this kind of smoky flavor. So this can be done vegan.
But there's so many good. There are also a lot of really wonderful chicken kielbasas.
Yes.
Now chicken
and
turkey.
They taste just like the beef. Exactly.
Yeah, you don't have to go with the pork.
Right. Version. Yeah, or beef. Sometimes it's made with beef. Again, we're going to cut these up quite small. It's going to be a side. So I want to mainly use this as a flavoring. And if you're going to go with this as a main course with an egg on top, which is how I like to make it, then you want to maybe put a little bit more of the kielbasa or make it a little bit larger.
Okay.
All right. So we want to switch over. I think I'm ready to switch over.
Okay. So if you have anything you want to share with everybody while I
Yes. So if you're going to do the bacon, you'll be adding it at the same time. But I do think that it's important to go ahead and put the oil in any way that it calls for, 2 or 3 tablespoons of oil to get this started. The reason being that when we make the vinaigrette, you will see in just a minute, we don't put any oil in the vinaigrette. So all the oil that comes from, that goes into the vinaigrette is going to be coming from the cooking oil that you're doing. Very flavorful. That's the other reason to do this with something like a kielbasa or bacon. So
yeah, obviously, if you're not going to have that fat component, you're going to need to make it in some other manner. So
exactly,
add a little more oil, or oil.
Yeah, because the oil also is going to be used to saute the cabbage. So one way or the other, you're going to get the oil in there, even if you don't use the meat component of it.
Right.
There we are. Okay. All right. So what are we doing? Are we going here?
That's on, so it's warming up.
So we want to maybe make it a little bit higher. There we go. And we're going to put our kielbasa in here. And it's going to cook until it is quite crispy, one hopes. That's what we're looking for, is getting this crispy. I'm just going to turn this up a little bit more and get there we go. So when it's done, and I'm going to just add this, when we're done with the, when this is all done, it'll look like this, where there's parts of it are going to be quite dark brown, And you just keep tossing this. It'll go quite quickly. Once it gets going, it'll go very fast. So you do want to keep an eye on it and not let it get burnt. All right, so we've got 2 batches of cabbage going, at least we will have in just a minute, because the first batch you're going to put in and you're actually going to toast the cabbage, or at least get it maybe a little bit charred is what we refer to it as. Although I don't view it as charred because it's not actually blackened, but it's got a very dark caramelized color to it. And then we add the second part of the cabbage on top of that. So there'll be like 2 levels of the amount of cooking that you're doing, or the type of cooking you're doing. So part of it will be and one of the things I've discovered about the cabbage is that it really gets so sweet when you get that char. It's counterintuitive. You think, oh my goodness, isn't that going to make it bitter? But it actually doesn't. It has the opposite effect. So this is going very nicely. And while we're doing that, I'm just going to get started. I think I can get started. I have enough time to get started with the vinaigrette. Just set this over here. Put this right here. Thank you, ma'am.
You're welcome.
You know what I forgot? I forgot to get the walnuts in here. So we'll do that as soon as this is done. So the walnuts, again, the reason why we're doing the walnuts in oil, which often when we toast our any type of nut, I love the toasted walnut. It just really brings out the flavor. We toast it in a plain pan or in the oven with no oil. But again, since we're going to be using the oil as part of the salad dressing, we want as much flavor in this oil as possible. So I think what I'm going to do is just go ahead and put the oil right in here with this. I just neglected to get it going earlier. I'm just going to go ahead and do that.
Now this is a very fallish dish as well, with the walnuts and the warmth of the kielbasa, and it strikes me as a dish that I would not necessarily want to be eating in the middle of the summer.
Oh, no. Right. This is definitely a fall winter dish.
I would also see this being a great way to round out some leftovers, like maybe a day or 2 after your Thanksgiving, and you need something that sort of just draws in the last bits of, and you like to accompany the last bits of the leftover turkey or other side dishes. And having the option of not doing the meat component in there, I don't think would be, you wouldn't miss it, but you could even put some chunks of turkey in this, don't you think?
You could, especially if you got a smoked turkey. It would be wonderful.
Oh, yeah.
And forget the kielbasa or the bacon.
Oh,
the
absolutely.
Turkey would be great. Yes.
Yeah. So there you go. If anybody's doing smoked turkey this year, this would be a great use of those turkey thighs that are still sitting around.
So this is, let's see, let's get it all the way up. This is flavoring the oil. As you can see, I mean, obviously you've got the walnuts, and here we go. Now we're starting to see a little bit of browning of the kielbasa. And it's really getting that oil flavoring. In fact, I think I think we're okay with this for right now, but in a minute, I'm going to put more in before we put in the. All right. So you want to get it pretty dark. I'm just going to go ahead and move it on out and keep going. I don't want I really don't want the nuts to char, to get too dark, because if you do, they're going to taste terrible. All right, let's see. Danielle, do you want to help me out here?
Can you reach the back one?
Well, that's one way of doing it.
Okay, pick it up.
There we go. It takes 4 hands when you're trying to do it quickly.
Well, you've got Julia Child and Julia Child here. What can I say?
Julia Child Senior and Julia Child.
All right.
Okay, here we go.
That goes off to the
This
side.
goes off to the side.
You're going to need your heat back on.
Yep.
Maybe another splash of oil.
Yep. Thank you. Look at you.
I know.
She's just taking over here.
I'm just trying to move things along because we're on a time crunch.
Okay. Now we're going to put about half of it in here, and you'll see. I hope you can hear sizzling of the cabbage.
Definitely. We can hear it sizzling away.
Great. All right.
You can't smell it and you can't taste it, but you can hear
You
it.
can hear it, right. So this is just going to sit in here for about 3 or 4 minutes to get it nice and charred. And I'm going to go ahead and start with get the salad dressing going. I've got some chopped or grated garlic. I'm going to use about half of it. I did about half of the recipe. And some miso. I don't know if you're familiar with light miso, but there it is. It's just a white miso. It's sweet. Sweet. It's sweeter. Let's put it that way. It's actually very salty. But
It
they call
actually does have sugar in it, though. I read the ingredients.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, I'm not going to take the time to do that now, but we're going to put about a tablespoon of that in there. There we go. I don't want to put too much because it does have quite a lot of salt in it. And I'm not putting any. I'm going to put a little bit of salt in the cabbage when we're close to the end, but not. See, it's starting to turn brown already. So you want to basically just leave it alone and let it get really quite brown. And then we're going to put a tablespoon of this, half a tablespoon actually, of the mustard. This is just a Dijon mustard, and I'd use Dijon mustard and not a don't use a yellow mustard. Use the Dijon, and a little bit of apple cider vinegar. And if you don't have apple cider vinegar, I view this as my base vinegar for many, many things. If you have only room in your cupboard for 1 or 2 flavored or not, alternative vinegars, the apple cider really works with so many things, especially for fall cooking. I mean, I like to keep sherry vinegar and all sorts of different kinds of vinegar around, but
Apple cider vinegar is a must in every pantry. I agree.
Go-to vinegar. A really great go-to vinegar. And a little bit more vinegar. So you see, you really are getting those, again, we're going on the fall flavors, and a little bit of water. So no oil in this. And that's ready to go. Let's see how we're doing here. This is starting to look pretty good. We've got one that's all prepped. We've got it over there. But I'm going to move this. I'm going to not burn myself this time, right?
Pull it straight back. Switch with you. It's heavy. This is what we're ultimately trying to achieve.
Look. Yeah. And to this, we're going to add, yep, it's going really nicely. We're going to add the next batch. We're going to add a little bit more oil. Because it's actually what happens is that when this cooks like this, as you can see, it actually absorbs the oil as it's cooking. So you do need to put a little extra in there. And then we're going to add the second batch of green cabbage, or the uncooked cabbage, I should say. And that's going to go like this. And we're going to put a cover on this one. See, there's a combination. And on the second batch of cabbage, you just let it cook until it's just the right softness for you. Now, a lot of people like theirs a little bit crisp. I prefer it to be quite cooked, but we're just going to let that cook for as long as it takes. And you don't need to add any water or any liquid to it at this point. The cabbage itself will take care of that. It'll kind of ease. The liquid will start to come. In fact, we're going to put some salt in there, I think. So let's go ahead and do that.
Well, the salt will help to draw out the moisture.
It will. That's exactly right.
It'll kind of maybe not speed things up, but it'll help things come along.
Yes, it definitely will. You don't want to put too much in because, as I said, the miso is making that dressing quite salty.
Miso is also, it's a fermented food, which is really very good for you. And yes, it is high in sodium, but that sodium has been a naturally occurring sodium as it ferments. So it's not like somebody stood there and dumped a cup of table salt into the miso.
Yeah,
That's not how that works.
all of these
Do
things.
you have an alternative to miso? Like if you didn't have it or if you didn't want to use the miso?
Yeah, you could just leave it out. Absolutely, not a problem. And I don't know. I mean, there is coconut amino acids that you could put. You could put maybe a tablespoon, or excuse me, a teaspoon, maybe 1 or 2 teaspoons of that. It works a lot like soy, but it's made of coconut and it's amino acids basically. And you could use that instead if you wanted to get that effect, but you don't have miso. Of course, I don't know. You might be more likely to have miso than coconut amino acids. Although the coconut amino, you can get. I've seen it everywhere, so that's become a very popular.
Yeah,
thing.
it has become a
And
very.
you can also just use soy sauce if you want, just a little bit of soy sauce. The miso has kind of doesn't have does it have more complexity or less complexity than the soy sauce? I don't know. It's a different flavor, but anyway, yes, you could definitely substitute.
It's a very different flavor. Yeah, I think it's a more I wouldn't say complex, but it's a more gentle, more nuanced than a soy sauce.
Right. Yeah, that's true. All right. So now we're going to add back the nuts and the kielbasa. This is assuming that your cabbage is pretty well cooked. It's getting there. It can take maybe up to 5 minutes, 5 or maybe even a little more, 8 minutes to get this cabbage the consistency that you want. So you can just let it sit there until it's done. And then the last thing, not quite the last thing, because we got one more thing to do. You just cover it up and just go do something else or keep an eye on it. And then the very last thing is we're going to take it off the heat. And we're going to add our dressing. Right. And it'll do what it's doing, which is it sizzles and the cabbage just laps it up. I don't think I'm going to need all of the dressing, but look at the little pieces of walnut all through it. I like this fairly finely chopped walnut. It's really nice to have, and it's easier than trying to chop it like that yourself. You'll never get quite that consistency. But the larger pieces, I think that they work as well, but I think this is just, it goes all through the cabbage. And then dill. Who doesn't love dill, right? This is fresh dill. You could use dry dill. I always find that I get large amounts of dill at the store and I don't use all of it. So what I try to do is, if I think about it, if I remember, I put it in on a pan, on like a cookie sheet, and let it dry naturally. And once it's really, really dry, you can put it in a bag, a little plastic bag, and stick it in the freezer to preserve it. Don't freeze it while it's fresh. It'll just get all clumpy.
I mean, I've been buying some gorgeous dill at the market in the last couple of weeks.
And
so
you use it right up?
Yeah.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So
here we are. Do you want to try it?
No, not right now.
Okay.
I'm going to go ahead and switch us back for any questions that anybody might have.
We did have one question come in about squashes, actually. So what variety of squash is good for soup, would you say?
Well, I actually love all of them. I have a triple squash soup that I do that includes pie pumpkin, acorn squash, and butternut squash. And I think if you can combine a couple of winter squashes, that gives you a depth in the soup that is just really, really lovely. More so than just focusing on one winter squash. I think the most common and easy go-to one would be butternut, but you shouldn't limit yourself. It's really, again, a sort of a personal preference. But I do notice a big difference when I combine at least two, if not three different winter squashes.